The polished obsidian floors of the Varelian royal palace shimmered under the soft glow of bioluminescent vines that curled along towering pillars of fused sandstone and silver alloy. It was a place of impossible grandeur, where gravity itself seemed to bow in reverence. But to Corporal Torin Vale, standing barefoot and shivering in a torn fatigues tunic, it felt more like the belly of a beast. Torin had not asked to be here. He had not asked to be plucked from a smoldering battlefield on the red dunes of Zyra 7, half buried beneath the wreckage of his dropship, his squad long turned to ash by plasma fire. He had certainly not asked to be dragged through corridors lined with silent, purple-skinned guards whose eyes glowed faintly like moonlit amethysts. Yet here he stood, blinking against the glare of hovering light orbs, his throat parched, his ribs aching, and his hands still caked in dried blood. Some of it his, most of it not. Before him, seated upon a throne carved from a single fong of some long-extinct sky beast, was Queen Zyra. She was breathtaking and terrifying in equal measure. Tall, statuesque, her violet skin dusted with iridescent scales that caught the light like crushed stars. Her white hair cascaded in thick braids down to her knees, threaded through with strands of living silver that pulsed gently with her breath. Her armor, forged from the carapace of a Varelian wardrake, clung to her like a second skin, sleek, segmented, and shimmering with glyphs that glowed whenever she moved. Torin had seen holos of her before, of course. Everyone in the Outer Rim had. The Iron Empress of the Vareli Dominion, the woman who had crushed 3 rebellions before breakfast and once stared down a rogue AI fleet with nothing but a ceremonial dagger and a whisper. But seeing her in person was like staring into a solar flare, bright enough to burn your soul clean off. He hadn't meant to touch her armor. It had been an accident, pure reflex. When one of the royal guards had shoved him forward too hard, Torin stumbled, his hand flailing out for balance. His fingers brushed the edge of the queen's shoulder pauldron, just for a heartbeat, just enough to feel the strange warmth of the living metal beneath his cracked knuckles. And then silence fell. Not just quiet, but the kind of hush that swallows sound whole, as if the palace itself held its breath. The queen's eyes, wide and luminous like twin nebulas, locked onto him. Her nostrils flared. The silver threads in her hair twitched like living wires sensing danger. And then, in a voice that shook the stained glass murals behind her, she shouted, "How dare you touch my armor, human?" Torin froze. Not metaphorically, he actually froze. His muscles locked. His lungs refused to expand. Even his pulse seemed to stutter mid-beat. Every survival instinct screamed at him to drop to his knees and beg, but his body wouldn't obey. All he could do was stare, wide-eyed, his mouth slightly open, as if he'd just walked into a dream that had mistaken him for an intruder. The court erupted. Gasps hissed through the air like escaping steam. Royal attendants clutched their ceremonial robes tighter. A dozen guards leveled their pulse lances, humming weapons glowing violet at the tips. Torin didn't flinch. He couldn't. But then something strange happened. Queen Zyra's fury faltered. Her brow creased, not in anger, but in something closer to confusion. She leaned forward, her clawed fingers gripping the arms of her throne. Her gaze roamed over Torin's face, not with contempt, but with a dawning, unsettling curiosity. Her lips parted, but no words came. Instead, she rose from her throne with a fluid grace that belied her size. The silver in her hair flickered rapidly now, like a nervous system trying to translate a forgotten memory. "Remove the gag," she ordered, her voice suddenly quieter, almost hesitant. A guard rushed forward and untied the rough cloth from around Torin's mouth. He coughed, his voice raw. I didn't mean to," he stammered, his knees finally unlocking enough to let him sink to one knee. "I swear, Your Majesty, I was pushed. I just lost my balance." She didn't respond immediately. Instead, she circled him slowly, her bare feet silent on the obsidian. Torin could smell her now. Something like ozone and desert sage, with a hint of something older, like the scent of stars cooling in deep space. He kept his eyes lowered, as protocol demanded, but couldn't help noticing the way her armor shifted subtly as she moved, reacting to her mood. The glyphs dimmed. The wardrake plates softened their hum. "You smell of Zyra," she said finally. "Of smoke and scorched steel, and something else. Something human." "I am human," Torin said, voice trembling despite himself. "Corporal Torin Vale, 12th Frontier Battalion. I was stationed at Outpost Delta 9. The Dominion fleet hit us without warning. My whole squad." "Silence," she snapped. But again, The edge in her voice was duller now, less sharp. She stopped directly in front of him. He could feel her eyes burning into the top of his head. "Raise your eyes, human." He did, and for the first time he saw it. The flicker of something deep in her gaze that wasn't royal disdain or imperial wrath. It was recognition. Not of him, but of something in him. "You have her eyes?" Zira whispered, so softly that only he could hear. He blinked. "Whose eyes, Your Majesty?" She didn't answer. Instead, she turned sharply to her chief advisor. A tall Varelian male with a scar running down one cheek and ceremonial tattoos swirling across his temples. "Lord Vexer," she said, her tone commanding once more. "Clear the court. All of them. Now." Vexer's eyes narrowed. "Your Majesty, this human is an enemy combatant. He violated the sanctity of the sovereign armor. He touched metal, not flesh." She interrupted, her voice dangerously calm. "And I will decide what is sacrilege in my own palace. Now go." With a stiff bow and a glare that promised future consequences, Lord Vexer signaled the guards. One by one, the courtiers filed out, their whispers trailing behind them like ghosts. Soon, only Torin and the Queen remained in the vast throne room, lit only by the soft, ambient glow of the vines. Zira exhaled slowly, the tension in her shoulders easing. She walked back to her throne but didn't sit. Instead, she removed one of her gauntlets and tossed it aside with a clatter that echoed through the emptiness. "Stand," she said. Torin rose shakily. "You are not here by accident, Corporal Vale," Zira said, stepping closer. "And I did not summon you from the battlefield out of mercy." She paused, her luminous eyes searching his. "You were found clutching something. A medallion. Do you still have it?" Torin's hand instinctively went to his chest, where a small chain still hung beneath his torn shirt. He pulled it out, a simple bronze disc with a scratched insignia, the symbol of the 12th Frontier Battalion. But on the back, there was something else. A tiny engraving of a 3-petaled flower, the Varelian bloom of remembrance. His mother's flower. "She gave this to me," he said, voice thick, "before she died. Said it was from my father, though I never knew him." Zira's breath hitched. Her fingers twitched toward the medallion, then pulled back as if burned. "That flower, it is only given to those born of royal blood or those bonded by blood oath. No human should possess it." "I don't understand," Torin said, his heart hammering now for an entirely different reason. Zira turned away, walking toward the balcony that overlooked the city of Viralsane, a metropolis of spires and floating gardens suspended above a desert sea of crimson sand. 32 solar cycles ago," she began, her voice low and heavy, "I walked among your kind, a diplomatic mission, or so it was called. But the truth was more complicated. I was young, reckless. I fell for a human medic, gentle hands, stubborn heart. His name was Elias." She paused, as if the name still carried weight. "We knew it could never last. Our peoples were already on the brink of war. But in secret we created life." Torin's blood ran cold, then hot, then cold again. You can't mean." "I returned to Viralsane pregnant," Zira continued, not turning around. "The child, a daughter, did not survive the birthing rites. The medics said human Varelian hybrids were too unstable. I buried her beneath the star-bloom tree, wrapped in the same bronze medallion, inscribed with her father's token and my grief." Torin's fingers trembled around the pendant. "Then, how is this mine?" Zira finally turned, her eyes wet with something that looked dangerously like tears. "Because the medics lied. They feared the child would be used as a weapon or a pawn. So they hid her, left her on a remote human colony with a fake identity. They told me she died so I would not search. So I would not war against my own counsel." Torin's mind reeled. "But I'm a man. Your child was a girl." Zira's expression softened. "You are not my child, Torin Vale. You are my grandson." The words hit him like a plasma round to the chest. He staggered back, nearly tripping over his own boots. That's impossible. My mother, she was human. She told me my father died in the asteroid uprisings." "Your mother," Zira said gently, "was my daughter, half human, half Varelian. She hid her heritage to protect you. And when she died, she gave you the medallion, her only link to me." Torin sank to his knees again, not from fear this time, but from sheer weight of revelation. His whole life, his loneliness, his sense of not belonging, The strange dreams of purple skies and singing sands suddenly made sense. He wasn't just a soldier. He was royal blood. Zira knelt beside him then, her regal composure cracking just enough to reveal the woman beneath, an empress who had mourned a daughter for decades, only to find her grandson standing in her throne room, covered in battlefield grime. "You touch my armor," she said softly. "Not as an enemy, but as kin, and in our old ways, only family may lay hands upon the sovereign carapace without consequence." Torin looked up at her, his eyes stinging. What happens now?" Zira smiled, a rare, genuine thing that lit up her violet face like dawn breaking over dunes. "Now you learn who you are. Now you choose what you will become. Soldier? Prince? Or something entirely your own?" Before Torin could respond, the palace alarms blared. A deep, resonant thrum that vibrated in the bones. Red lights pulsed along the ceiling. Zira's expression hardened instantly back into that of a warrior queen. "Rebels," she hissed. "The Obsidian faction. They've breached the outer shield." She rose in one fluid motion and slapped a panel on her throne. Instantly, her armor resealed itself, the glyphs blazing crimson. She turned to Torin, her eyes blazing with both urgency and something else. Pride. "Can you fight, grandson?" Torin stood, rolling his shoulders, feeling the ache of old wounds and the fire of new purpose. "I was born fighting, your majesty." "Then follow me," she said, already striding toward the armory corridor. "And call me grandmother." What followed was chaos wrapped in thunder. Rebel forces, rogue Varelians clad in blackened exosuits, stormed the palace halls, their weapons spitting acid rounds that melted through stone. Torin, armed with a pulse rifle loaned from the royal arsenal and wearing a makeshift Varelian combat vest that hummed against his skin, fought beside royal guards who now looked at him with grudging respect. He moved with the instincts of a frontier soldier, but something more. A strange intuition that told him where enemies would appear, when to duck, when to fire. It was as if his blood remembered this place. Zira fought like a storm given form, her armor deflecting blasts, her white hair whipping like war banners as she cleaved through rebels with a curved energy blade. At one point, a rebel commander lunged at her from behind. Torin saw it before it happened, some ancestral echo, and tackled her out of the way, taking a glancing shot to the shoulder. The pain was sharp, but the look she gave him, half fury, half awe, was worth it. "You saved your queen," she panted, helping him up. "You saved your grandson," he shot back, grinning through gritted teeth. Later, in the palace's central vault, now a makeshift command center, the tide turned. Loyalist reinforcements arrived from the orbital fleet. The rebel leader, Lord Vexer himself, was cornered in the Hall of Mirrors. He had always resented Zira's softness toward humans, and now, with proof of her half-human lineage in the form of Torin, he saw his chance to seize the throne. "You shame our bloodline," Vexer snarled, his blade crackling. "A human mongrel sitting beside you? The Dominion will crumble." "The Dominion," Zira said coolly, standing shoulder to shoulder with Torin, "was never about purity. It was about strength through unity. And today we are stronger than ever." The duel was swift. Torin didn't fight with Vexer, but he stood ready, his rifle aimed, his presence a symbol. When Zira disarmed Vexer and pressed her blade to his throat, she didn't kill him. "Exile," she declared. "You will live to see what you called weakness become our greatest strength." In the days that followed, the palace healed. The bioluminescent vines bloomed brighter. The court whispered less and watched more. Watched as Torin trained with the royal guard, as he studied Varelian history, as he sat with Zira in the Starbloom Garden, the same place where his mother had been buried in secret. He learned of his mother's life, how she'd lived as a botanist on a human agri-world, how she'd kept her heritage hidden until the end, how she'd written letters to Zira that were never sent. He held those letters in his hands, his tears falling on pages yellowed with time. Zira, for her part, began changing the empire. Trade routes reopened with human colonies. Cultural exchanges were planned. And Torin, still a soldier at heart, was named Royal Liaison to the Outer Rim, a title that made him groan in mock protest but secretly filled him with purpose. One evening, under twin moons that cast lavender shadows over the crimson dunes, Zira found him on the palace balcony, staring into the distance. "You miss your old life?" she asked. Torin shook his head. "I miss my squad, but I never truly belonged there. Not like I do here." Zira placed a hand on his shoulder. This time he didn't flinch. "You are not just a bridge between our peoples, Torin. You are a new beginning." He smiled, Does this mean I get my own armor someday? She chuckled, a sound like wind through crystal chimes. If you can survive my daughter's cooking. My aunt. Yes, Zira said, eyes twinkling. She's visiting next week. She runs a vineyard on Zyra 7. Grows the finest desert wine in 3 systems. And she's been dying to meet her nephew. Torin's heart swelled with a warmth he hadn't known since childhood. Family. Not just a memory, but a future. He looked out over Viralsane, the city of light and sand, and for the first time he didn't see an alien world. He saw home, and somewhere in the distance, beyond the palace walls, beyond the dunes and the stars, a new story was just beginning. One written not in blood or war, but in understanding, in laughter, and in the quiet courage of a human man who once froze in fear, and now stood tall beside a queen who called him kin. Weeks passed like desert winds, swift, warm, and full of unseen currents. Torin settled into life within the Varelian royal palace with surprising ease. He trained with the royal guard, studied diplomacy under elder counselors, and even learned to brew the bitter ceremonial tea that Zira favored at dawn. The court, once skeptical, now watched him with cautious curiosity, and whispers of the human prince began to replace the old slurs. Yet for all the comfort he found, a quiet unease lingered beneath the surface. An instinct forged in war zones that told him peace was never permanent. Then the vineyard ship arrived. It descended at twilight, its hull shaped like a crescent leaf, shimmering with bioluminescent algae that pulsed gently in the Varelian dusk. Aboard was Lady Sorel, Zira's younger sister and Torin's newly discovered aunt. She was taller than the queen, with sharper cheekbones and eyes the color of storm clouds. Her white hair was shorn short, threaded with living vines that bloomed tiny silver flowers when she smiled. And smile she did broadly, warmly, as she pulled Torin into a crushing hug the moment she stepped onto the palace landing. "You've got your mother's nose," she said, tears in her eyes. "And your grandfather's stubborn chin. Bless the stars, you're real." For 2 days, the palace thrummed with celebration. Sorel brought barrels of Zyran Sun wine, and the royal kitchens prepared dishes that fused Varelian spices with human flavors. Roasted dune lizard with garlic butter, spiced grain cakes drizzled with honey nectar. Torin laughed more than he had in years. He told stories of frontier outposts and malfunctioning hoverbikes. Sorel countered with tales of smuggling rare orchids past Dominion customs agents disguised as botanists. Zira watched them both, her heart full in a way it hadn't been since the war began. But on the 3rd night, everything unraveled. Torin awoke to the scent of smoke. Not the clean, metallic kind from plasma fire, but something organic, sickly sweet. He followed it to the royal archive, where Sorel stood alone, her back to him, her hands hovering over an ancient data crystal. The moment she heard his footsteps, she whirled, her vines curling protectively around her neck. "Torin, you shouldn't be here," she said too quickly. "What are you doing?" he asked, stepping closer. "Research," she replied, but her eyes darted to the crystal. "Old family records. Curious about our lineage." He frowned. "Then why are you burning the backup terminals?" She froze. A thin trail of black smoke curled from a console behind her. Before she could answer, alarms blared. Not the deep war drums of invasion, but the sharp, piercing shriek of internal betrayal. Palace lights flickered red. Zira's voice boomed over the comms. "Lock down the archive wing. Intruder alert." Sorel's face twisted in panic. She lunged for the crystal, but Torin was faster. He caught her wrist, his soldier's reflexes kicking in. "Aunt, what is this?" Her eyes filled with tears. Not of guilt, but of desperation. "They have her, Torin. My daughter, your cousin. Taken 3 cycles ago by the Obsidian Remnant. They told me. They told me if I didn't retrieve the Sovereign Genetic Codex, the blood key that unlocks the Royal Gene Vault, they'd execute her at dawn." Torin's blood ran cold. "You're helping them?" "I'm trying to save her," Sorel sobbed. "She's only 21. She tends the white vines in the Eastern Grove. She sings to the Sand WRMS like they're pets. She doesn't deserve to die because of old wars." Before Torin could respond, royal guards burst into the chamber, weapons raised. Zira entered behind them, her armor dark, her expression unreadable. "Sorel," she said softly, "you knew the Codex is not just a key, it's a weapon. If the Remnant unlocks the royal genome, they can engineer soldiers immune to pain, loyalty, even death. Entire armies of hollow warriors." "I didn't care," Sorel cried. I just wanted Lyra back. Zira's shoulders slumped. Lyra was never taken. Silence. What? Sorel whispered. Lyra is safe, Zira said, stepping forward. She's been in the High Sanctuary on Viral Moon since the first rebel uprising. I sent her there myself. I never told you because I feared you'd be targeted. Sorel staggered back, her vines wilting. Then who? A forgery, Zira said grimly. The remnant faked Lyra's capture. They knew your weakness, your love for your child, and used it to turn you against us. Torin released his aunt's wrist, his heart aching. They played you. Sorel collapsed to her knees, weeping. I almost destroyed everything. For a lie. But Zira didn't strike her down. Instead, she knelt beside her sister and pulled her into an embrace. You were a mother first. That is no crime. Still, the damage was done. The remnant had anticipated failure. As if on cue, the palace's primary shield generator exploded in a silent flash, sabotaged from within. Then came the tremors. Not from the sky, but from below. The crimson dunes surrounding the city began to shift, sink, collapse. From the newly opened chasms emerged war machines unlike any Torin had seen. Sleek, skeletal drones with pulsing cores, piloted by figures in tattered black cloaks. The Hollow-born, Zira whispered, rising. They've weaponized the gene experiments after all. Worse still, a new transmission crackled over the emergency channels. A distorted voice, both mechanical and eerily familiar. Hello, grandmother, it said. Miss me? Torin's breath caught. That voice. Zira's face went pale. No, it can't be. The transmission cut to a live feed. Standing atop a Hollow-born warwalker, clad in cracked, mismatched armor stitched with human and Varelian parts, was a young woman with violet skin, white hair, and eyes that glowed with artificial fire. She wore a tattered medallion, the twin of Torin's. Lyra? Sorel gasped, but Zira shook her head slowly. Not Lyra. Something worse. The girl, who looked exactly like Sorel's daughter, smiled, but it was hollow, forced. They rebuilt me, she said, after they found me in the sanctuary. They used the codex fragments to fuse me with machine and memory. I am the first true hybrid, and I will be your queen. Torin's mind reeled. The remnant hadn't just stolen technology, they'd stolen family. The battle that followed was unlike any in Varelian history. The Hollow-born didn't bleed. They didn't tire. They moved with unnatural precision, their movements echoing both Varelian martial arts and brutal human close-quarters combat. The palace defenses crumbled. Sections of the western spire collapsed into the dunes. Torin fought beside Zira and a repentant Sorel, who wielded a vine whip that bloomed explosive thorns with every crack. But it was Torin who saw the truth first. She's fighting like Lyra, he shouted over the din of collapsing stone and screaming metal. She dodges left when she's scared. She always did that as a child. Your journal said so. Sorel's eyes widened. Then, she's still in there? Zira gritted her teeth. The remnant may have overwritten her mind, but they couldn't erase her soul. Torin made a decision. While Zira held the front line, he slipped through the underground aqueducts, passages Sorel had shown him during their wine-tasting walks. They led directly beneath the Hollow-born command node. There, in a chamber lit by pulsing bioreactors, stood Lyra, or what remained of her, connected to a neural web that crackled with stolen memories. He didn't raise his weapon. Instead, he stepped into the light and held up his medallion. Lyra, he said gently, your mother sings to the San WYRMS. She says they hum lullabies in return. The girl froze. Her glowing eyes flickered. The machines around her stuttered. You know that, she whispered, her voice cracking. I know you hate sun wine, Torin continued, stepping closer. You pour it out and pretend to drink. I know you keep a pet scarab named General Fluff under your bed. I know you cry when the twin moons align because it reminds you of your grandmother's lullaby. Tears, real human tears, slid down Lyra's violet cheeks. The neural web sparked violently. They made me forget. No, Torin said, reaching out. You just needed someone to remember for you. He touched her hand. At that moment, the palace shook again. But this time, it wasn't from war. The starbloom tree in the central garden, long thought dormant, erupted in radiant white blossoms. Its roots, ancient and interwoven with the palace's foundation, surged with bioenergy. The light spread through the corridors, through the aqueducts, into the chamber. Lyra screamed. Not in pain, but in release. As the machine components fused to her body shattered and fell away, her eyes returned to their natural violet, soft and full of sorrow. Above, the Hollowborn armies collapsed, their control severed. The remnant fled into the dunes, leaderless. In the aftermath, the palace stood wounded but unbroken. Lyra, weak but whole, was cradled in her mother's arms. Zira declared a new era, the age of reckoning and reunion, where truth would be valued over secrecy and compassion over control. Torin stood on the balcony once more, the twin moons casting their lavender glow. He no longer felt like an outsider. He was Torin Vale, soldier, grandson, uncle, and perhaps something more. Because as he turned to go inside, he caught sight of Princess Naila, Zira's youngest granddaughter, watching him from the garden archway. She was fierce-eyed, quick-witted, and had once challenged him to a duel just to prove humans weren't soft. She'd lost, but only because she'd been laughing too hard at his joke mid-swing. She tossed him a sunwine bottle. "Still alive, cousin?" He caught it with a grin. "Barely, but enough." And as the starbloom tree continued to bloom behind them, its petals drifting like snow over crimson sands, Torin knew this wasn't just a story of war and royalty. It was a story of scars that heal, of lies that shatter, and of families found in the unlikeliest of places. The desert whispered its secrets, and for the first time Torin understood its language. Months melted into seasons, and the scars of war slowly softened beneath the steady rhythm of peace. The Varelian royal palace, once a symbol of unyielding power, transformed into something warmer, a home. Repairs to the western spire were finished not with cold alloy, but with living coralstone that bloomed in response to emotion, turning pink when children laughed nearby and deep indigo during solemn council meetings. The starbloom tree, now thriving with renewed vigor, became a gathering place for storytelling, tea ceremonies, and the occasional impromptu SandWYRM petting session, much to the palace steward's exasperation. Torin no longer wore the tattered fatigues of a frontier soldier. His new uniform, tailored from woven moon silk and lined with flexible scale mail, bore the insignia of both the 12th Frontier Battalion and the Royal House of Viralsane. He was no longer just the human or the prince. He was Torin Vale, grandson of the Iron Empress, uncle to Lyra, and, much to his own surprise, betrothed to Princess Naila. Their courtship had been anything but traditional. There were no grand declarations or politically arranged trials. Instead, it began with a shared love of terrible poetry, a mutual hatred of fermented kelp stew, and a near-fatal hoverbike race across the crimson dunes that ended with both of them buried up to their necks in sand, laughing until they cried. Naila, sharp-tongued and brilliant, had once told him, "You're annoyingly human, but I suppose I've grown fond of your chaos." He'd replied, "And you're terrifyingly Varelian, but I've grown fond of your fire." It was enough. Their wedding was held beneath the twin moons, in the very garden where Torin had once stood alone, a frightened soldier with nothing but a medallion and a lifetime of questions. Now, surrounded by family, Zira radiant in silver-threaded robes, Cyril weaving floral crowns with Lyra's help, even former guards who'd once pointed pulse lances at his chest. Torin took Naila's hands and vowed not to rule beside her, but to build with her. "Not a throne," he said, "but a table where all are welcome." Zira, watching from the front row with tears glistening on her violet cheeks, whispered to Cyril, "He's more royal than most born to it." The years that followed overflowed with joy. Torin and Naila built a home on the palace's eastern rim, where the dunes met the floating gardens. It wasn't grand by imperial standards, just a sunlit house with wide windows, a rooftop observatory, and a kitchen that always smelled of roasting root vegetables and human-style bread, a recipe Torin had smuggled from Outpost Delta 9. And children came, first a daughter with Naila's luminous eyes and Torin's stubborn chin, then twin boys who could argue in 3 languages by age 4, and finally a youngest girl who, at 2, declared herself General of the SandWRM Cavalry, and refused to wear anything but combat boots to dinner. They were a curious blend, purple skin kissed by human freckles, white hair streaked with strands of chestnut, eyes that shifted color with their moods. The court called them the Bridgeborn, but at home, they were simply Mama's little rebels and Papa's chaos crew. Torin taught them how to mend a plasma rifle and how to bake apple pie. Naila taught them the old Varelian star songs and the art of negotiating peace without losing your dignity or your dessert. Lyra, now fully healed and serving as Minister of Genetic Ethics, oversaw the dismantling of all Hollowborn research. She established the first hybrid accord, ensuring no being would ever again be altered against their will. Cyril returned to her vineyard but visited often, arriving every harvest season with barrels of sun wine and stories of escaped San-WRMs that probably weren't her fault. Zira, though she formally abdicated the throne in favor of a joint council that included human representatives, remained the heart of the palace, hosting weekly grandchildren's tea, where debates over dessert portions were taken as seriously as interstellar diplomacy. Peace didn't mean silence. There were still squabbles, scraped knees, diplomatic snafus, and the occasional kitchen fire caused by over-enthusiastic baking experiments. But through it all, there was love, deep, loud, messy, and unshakable. One evening, decades after that first terrifying moment in the throne room, Torrens sat on the palace balcony with Zira, both older now, their hair streaked with silver and time. Below, their grandchildren chased bioluminescent fireflies through the garden, shrieking with laughter. "You once froze in fear," Zira said softly, sipping her tea. "Now you build worlds." Torrens smiled, watching Naila scoop up their youngest and swing her onto her shoulders. "I had a good teacher." Zira reached over and squeezed his hand. No armor between them now, just skin and warmth. "And I had a grandson who reminded me that strength isn't in the throne, but in the hands that hold it gently." As the twin moons rose over the crimson dunes, casting their lavender light across the city of Viral Sane, the starbloom tree released a shower of white petals into the night air, soft, silent, and full of promise. And in that moment, beneath a sky shared by humans and Varelians alike, the story didn't end. It simply bloomed. Torrens stood on the balcony, Naila beside him, their fingers laced like roots of the same tree. Below, their children played among the glowing vines, their laughter echoing through the palace halls once filled with fear. The starbloom tree shimmered under the twin moons, its white petals drifting like blessings on the warm desert wind. Zira watched from her garden bench, a contented smile on her lips, surrounded by grandchildren who called her Grandstorm for her legendary temper, and her even fiercer hugs. Sorel arrived with a new vintage of sun wine, Lyra at her side, both bearing baskets of desert fruit and stories from the outer colonies. The war was a memory now, its scars softened by time and tenderness. Torrens' old dog tags hung in the Royal Museum beside Zira's wardrake armor, not as relics of conflict, but as symbols of unity. In the kitchen, the twins tried and failed to recreate Torrens' famous frontier stew, while their youngest declared war on bedtime again. Naila leaned her head on Torrens' shoulder. "We did it," she whispered. "We built something that lasts." He kissed her temple. Not just something, a home. And as the stars blinked awake above the endless crimson dunes, the palace hummed, not with power, but with peace. Laughter rang from every corridor. Love lived in every room. And in the heart of it all, a human man who once froze in terror now stood unshaken, surrounded by family, rooted in belonging, and utterly, perfectly happy.